Create a Barnwood look with the IOD grape stamp and DIY paint. We live in an area where there are lots of vineyards and lots of old barns, which got me thinking about how cool it would look to put those grape stamps over Barnwood. Then I flipped the IOD grapes package over, and there's inspiration right on the back of the package. Grapes on Barnwood. So I'm still working off that pile of vintage stuff into the back to see if he could find some chippy old Barnwood doors. We found them, but it turns out they belonged on a cupboard upstairs, so I have to create my own Barnwood look. I will actually create the look of Barnwood with Debbie's DIY chalk paint, some waxes, and some tools. I'm not even going to use brushes. We went over to the barn where we found a nice piece of wood that would work for the tabletop. JR cut it down and then we sanded it smooth. It's a perfect fit. I was really loving the color of those chippy old green and white doors, the ones that go on the other cupboard. So I pulled out mint chip and whatever DIY white paint I had on hand. In this case, I'm using white Swan and beadboard. I spread the paint on my board with the putty knife. In order to add more texture, I'm mixing in our Fusion Fresco. It's a texturizing agent. I mix it in with the paint so that it's really chunky and thick.
Dreamy, breezy, we go easy.
And spread that thickened texturized paint over the board as well. Leave some of the wood showing.
Agents of the other, beyond gravel, beyond all.
Then I'll take the white Swan and mix Fresco in with that, doing the same thing. Slop it right on the board and spread it out with the putty knife. You know how sometimes when your Debbie's DIY paint is sitting on the shelf for a while and there's only a little bit left in the jar, it gets dried up? I use that thickened paint from the lid and around the top inside edge. Yeah, that's the good stuff. That thick paint, it creates even more texture.
On our tiptoes, undercover agents of
I continue to add layers of the textured Fresco mix and that dried paint. Build it up until it looks like Barnwood. And then allow it to dry. Once the paint has completely dried, I'll run a putty knife or a scraper along the surface of it and chip away some of that paint. The grape stamp has really nice big elements, those big bundles of grapes and leaves. I like to cut apart the stamp, leaving it right on the backing sheet. Round off any pointy, sharp edges of the backing sheet. Each of the IOD stamp sets comes with a bonus reusable mask. We're going to use these later on to layer the stamps. So pop those out of the perforations just to have them handy and ready to use. Now I'll lay out the stamps just to get a general idea of how I want my final placement. I found that I love stamping with IOD ink over Debbie's DIY chalk paint. Something about the way that ink soaks into the chalk paint and dries quickly, leaving you nice, crisp, sharp images. I prefer to lay my stamp flat with the textured side up and then apply the ink pad to the stamp. Then gently press over the surface of the entire stamp, stabilizing it with one hand, avoiding any shifting or movement. Here's another little design trick. I like to apply some of my stamps so that they're coming off the edge of the tabletop. Now let's create some layers using the mask. Once the bottom layer has dried, I apply the mask to the top of that image and then take the stamp that I want to layer over. I'll ink it up and then I'll apply the stamp to both the painted surface and over the mask which I had laid down. You'll see that I got ink on the mask, but when I lift it up and remove the mask, I've created a really cool layered look without overlapping the stamps. Another reason that I love stamping on chalk paint is that it's quick and easy cleanup. If I get a smudge or if I stamp someplace where I don't want it, I could just clean it up with a damp Q-tip. And while we're talking about cleanup, I use baby wipes to clean up the ink off of my stamps. Once the ink is dry, I can come back in with a worn sanding block and soften the whole look. For a final finish, I'm using Debbie's DIY white wax over the whole tabletop. Then I'll come in with some dark wax to create a little bit more depth. After it's dried for a few hours, I'll buff it to a soft sheen. Now, JR is going to put my Barnwood tabletop back onto the table base.
Yeah, you better step into the light, just give it a try. Think that it's time you let that spark out. You've been hiding in the shadows way too long.
And there you have it, my rustic tabletop, inspired by Barnwood, by vineyards, by the back of the IOD grape stamp package, and from a couple of old cupboard doors. I've added links to all of the products that I used in the description box below. You can also visit us online at ellenjgoods.com or at our brick and mortar shop in Medina, New York. We'd love it if you'd subscribe and hit the notifications button so that you'll be sure to catch our next DIY tutorial.